This video is about Wi-Fi video transmitters. To give you a better understanding of what to look for when buying one, as there are so many choices out there. When Axoon asked me if I'd be interested in making a sponsored video for their latest SDI and HDMI CineEye 2S Pro, because I've been using their products for about 3 years now and had that experience with the HDMI model, it made total sense to say yes. Now, whilst this isn't a review, a sponsored video can never be called that. I rarely do them, but when I do, they have to be for products I truly think are great and actually use. If I tell you something is great and you go and buy it because of this, but it actually isn't, then your trust in me will be broken. And after 13 years of making these camera gear related reviews on YouTube, I can never let that happen. At this point, I should probably explain this ridiculous setup that I have here. At the center of it is my Sony FX6, shooting in 4K 25p, and it has a clean signal which is being sent out of the SDI into the CineEye 2S Pro. The receiver that is capable of getting a perfect signal up to 350 meters away with clear line of sight is 40 centimeters away here. And it's sending a 1080p 25p video feed via the SDI output into my Small HD 702 touch monitor, my favorite monitor of all time. I'm also sending out of the HDMI of that receiver into the Atomos Sumo. Beneath the Small HD monitor is an iPad Pro. It's a 12.5 inch one. And that's running the Axoon Go app, which is a superb app that turns any smartphone or tablet into a fully featured monitor. And I'll show you more of that later. And you can use 4 iOS or Android devices at the same time, like the original CineEye. I'm only sending to 2 right now. Second one is here. That's not all though. The Atomos Ninja 5 here is directly plugged into the FX6 via HDMI, obviously. But that's not it. There is of course a camera that is filming this, and that's the Canon R5 recording in 8K, so I can do all this panning and zooming in and out in post on my 1080p timeline. And as that camera notoriously overheats, and so I can see that all these screens are working, I've plugged in my CineEye 2, which I'm receiving on this iPad. So it's just a simple everyday setup that you do for every video really. Why am I doing this? Well, partly because I do like to make my life difficult for some reason. But mainly it's so we can see if there is any difference between the latency from the transmitters, direct connections, HDMI, SDI, everything like that. The first Axoon video transmitter that I bought was the original CineEye, and I loved it. It's small, with a built-in battery, HDMI input, and transmitted to up to 4 iOS and Android devices at the same time, over the 5 GHz Wi-Fi frequency. Using my phone or iPad as a monitor was really strange, but because it worked really well, it was great. Really perfect for lightweight setups, but also with the ability to go to 4 separate devices, great for shoots with more than one client who wanted to see what I was doing, and also for 2 camera interviews, so the second camera operator could match my framing easily, especially if I did zoom and change the frames. Really, really useful. When I was filming my documentary Shamalipi and Skiathos in Greece in 2018 maybe, using the Fujifilm GFX 100, the CineEye was invaluable for all the shots I did where I locked off the camera and was in the frame but nowhere near the camera. With the feed to my phone, I could easily see if it was recording, if it was in focus, and if the framing was right. Whilst there is a Fuji app for that camera, it is capable of sending me a feed. Sometimes it's just really not very good, pretty much like all the camera apps. There's a couple of good ones, but most of them are terrible. Terrible range and really bad image quality. When I was in Skiathos, there wasn't exactly much Wi-Fi around to cause any interference issues, but the same can't be said about where I live in London. There's so much using those Wi-Fi frequencies just in my house. That interference is inevitable. When you start getting further away from the transmitter, it obviously is more susceptible to that. One of the best things about the Pro models is their dual band frequencies, which can intelligently switch to the cleanest channels for each of the channels. And if there is any break with the frequencies and data is lost, it can combine the data of those two frequencies to restore the image to what's being transmitted. Axoon claim a range of around 350 meters, 600 feet, if you have that clear line of sight. Now, I never take any manufacturer's claims as gospel. No, I needed to test this for myself. Not just with clear line of sight, but with obstacles. Now, I can't ever imagine needing to be as far away as I got with Julian, but it just means you're going to get a really solid connection when you're much closer. They're powered off of Sony NPF batteries. A 970 will give you up to 14 hours according to Axoon. I couldn't verify that though, because all my 970 batteries are getting on a bit. What I can say is during my tests, I didn't need to change batteries at all during the day. With my FX6 here, I'm not using a battery on the transmitter. It's getting its power from a cable connected via DTAP to the camera's battery. Now, this is better when mounting on a camera like this, as it does keep that weight down when you don't have double batteries to charge. Setting them up is an absolute piece of cake. You make sure you've got an input, battery, turn them on, and make sure the channels are the same on the transmitter receiver so they can see each other. And also, if you are using multiple CineEyes, you want to make sure that you're receiving the correct transmitter. If your receiver's on the wrong channel, you're not going to see what you're transmitting. I mean, if your receiver's on the wrong channel, you could in theory accidentally pick up somebody else's transmitter if they were close by. I mean, the range is pretty good. It's highly unlikely though. The CineEye Pro 2 has HDMI pass-through. So if you only have a single output from your camera, which is HDMI, and you want to use a monitor or EVF which has an input only, this is an essential feature for you. The CineEye 2S Pro doesn't have a pass-through because it uses that space on the transmitter to add the SDI input. Both models have the same amount of latency and range. It's the physical connections which are the main differences. There's lots of variables you need to take into account when you're looking at the latency on your receiver. Part of it depends on the camera that you're using. Some cameras have visible latency even when connecting directly to a monitor, like a hard connection. My Sony cameras are very good, both with the SDI and HDMI. But latency also depends on the monitor your receiver is plugged into. So to test out the latency, I did some shots of my cat. And I basically learned nothing, of course. So here's a more useful latency test, as you can see, which are the devices have the least latency. Very scientific, right? To actually really show you the latency, let's do a quick test using a timer that shows milliseconds. Very nerdy. There are so many variables that can influence this sort of test. The different monitors, the phone, the cables, and of course, the camera itself. Axoon quote a latency of less than 60 milliseconds, but that is measuring purely the latency between the transmitter and receiver. Their lab tests use fast monitors with fast graphics cards, so they could eliminate those pesky things like the cameras and monitors that we use. One thing to remember about these figures is just how short a millisecond is. When we blink, that's about 300 milliseconds. One single frame of 25p video, as in 25 frames per second, is 40 milliseconds. The LCD screen of the FX6 with its proprietary cable was consistently giving me a latency around the 60 millisecond mark. The Atomos Ninja 5, when plugged directly into the camera, was giving me a higher figure than this, and getting worse depending on how many of the features you use of it. But by outputting a higher frame rate like 60p helps reduce latency. So we have a starting lag before it even gets to the transmitter. The CineEye Pro 2S then adds its latency. I could spend hours going through all my different tests and results, but it would be very boring for both you and I. What I found was the iOS devices connected via the app did really well, consistently getting really good results, often better than the monitors. The latency figures from the output of the receiver via HDMI or SDI are so dependent on both the monitor that you're using and that frame rate. When I was at 25p, it was often a good 100 milliseconds behind the iPhone. But at 60p, I was getting much closer to it and even to the hardwired Ninja 5. As always with these videos, I go a little bit too far and I lost the plot, and this test was ridiculous. And this is when I had an intervention. And thankfully I'm over it now, otherwise you wouldn't be seeing this video. So from all of these tests, it's clear that a higher frame rate is going to give you least latency with your transmitter and with your monitors. And this is the same with all of the Wi-Fi based transmission systems. They all need a higher frame rate to get the best performance. The much more expensive systems out there that have that quoted zero latency aren't using Wi-Fi. They do need to have separate receivers and monitors. So you cannot use phones and tablets as monitors. So that is the trade-off with using non-Wi-Fi based systems. And of course, the extra cost. I think I've covered latency enough now. Can I go back to my cats, please? Talking about the Axoon Go app, it's easily the best that I've used out of all the wireless systems that I've tried out. It really does turn your mobile device into a really terrific, fully featured monitor, as long as your device has got a really nice screen. Amongst its features are focus assist tools, histogram, waveform, false color, zebras, in-app audio, anamorphic desqueeze, markers, video recording, and ability to load up your own 3D LUTs. You can also use it to live stream to like YouTube. I truly think the CineEye 2 Pro and 2S Pro are superb systems. The only thing that might steer me towards the smaller, cheaper CineEye 2 non-Pro models is when I'm using a mirrorless camera and want to keep things that bit smaller. You don't have the same range or dual frequencies, and of course it doesn't have the receiver, so you use your mobile device, but it's still a fantastic little device. How many times have I said device in that sentence? Quite a lot. I'm just going to end this video on a little anecdote. I was being filmed a few weeks ago for an advertising campaign, and the camera crew who were filming me had a traditional video transmission system for their client monitor. So just one receiver, no apps and no Wi-Fi. And we were on location in London, constantly moving. And the cameraman did say to me that it was a pain and he wished he had a system that could let the clients monitor what he was filming on their phones instead of what he had, which was that monitor on a light stand that someone had to keep moving around. I said, should have told me. I've got a really great system you could have borrowed. Or rented from me.